The first thing I noticed wasn't the balloons. It wasn't even the minivan parked crooked in my driveway like someone had been drinking champagne at 10 in the morning. No, the first thing that hit me was the banner stretched across my front porch, flapping in the October wind like a surrender flag. "Welcome home, our little miracle," in Comic Sans font. Because apparently my wife Julia thought our life was a kindergarten art project. I sat in my rental car for a full minute, jet lag making my brain feel like it was swimming through molasses. 3 weeks in Prague, debugging corporate security systems, and I come home to what looked like a gender reveal party had exploded all over my house. Blue and pink balloons bobbed from every surface, and I could hear laughter and music drifting through the windows. "What the heck?" I muttered, grabbing my laptop bag from the passenger seat. I'd texted Julia from the airport that my flight was delayed, but clearly she hadn't gotten the message. Or she had, and this was some kind of surprise party. Though for what, I couldn't imagine. I walked up the front steps, noting at least 6 cars I didn't recognize, parked along our street. The Hendersons next door were peeking through their curtains with the kind of obvious curiosity that made me want to flip them off. Instead, I plastered on what I hoped was a normal expression and opened my own front door. The noise hit me like a physical wall. 20-some people packed into our living room, all holding drinks and talking over each other. Julia stood in the center of it all, glowing in that way pregnant women are supposed to glow, except Julia wasn't pregnant. At least, she hadn't been when I left for Prague 3 weeks ago. "Dave!" she shrieked when she saw me, rushing over with her arms spread wide. "You're early! This is perfect timing!" I stood there like an idiot while she hugged me, my brain trying to process what I was seeing. Julia was definitely showing. Not just bloated from too much pizza showing, but actual baby bump showing. The kind that takes months to develop. "Surprise," she said, stepping back and placing both hands on her stomach with that universal pregnant lady pose. "We're having a baby!" The room erupted in cheers and congratulations, people clapping and raising their glasses. I recognized Julia's friends from the hospital where she worked as a pediatric nurse, Angela with her perfectly highlighted hair and tendency to gossip about everyone, Marcy, who treated every social gathering like a wine tasting event, and Steve from radiology, who thought he was funnier than he actually was. But it was the man standing behind Julia who made my stomach drop into my shoes. My brother Brandon, 24 years old and supposedly house-sitting while I was gone, had his hand on Julia's lower back in a way that seemed way too familiar. He wasn't meeting my eyes. "Isn't it amazing?" Julia was saying, her voice pitched higher than usual. "We just found out last week. The doctor says I'm about 12 weeks along." 12 weeks. I started doing math in my head, counting backwards. 12 weeks ago, I'd been traveling constantly for work, gone more than I was home. But Brandon had been around, helping Julia with yard work and fixing the leaky faucet in the guest bathroom. I started, then stopped. Everyone was looking at me expectantly, waiting for me to say something appropriately excited and husband-like. "That's wonderful, honey." Angela giggled and nudged Marcy with her elbow. "I bet you two have been practicing for this for months." All that time, Brandon's been helping around the house. Julia's been getting plenty of exercise. More laughter. Brandon shifted uncomfortably and finally looked at me, his face flushed red. We had the same dark hair and brown eyes, but where I was tall and thin from too much coffee and not enough sleep, Brandon had inherited our father's stocky build and what our mother had always called natural charm. Women loved him, apparently including my wife. "I need a drink," I said, heading toward the kitchen. "There's beer in the cooler," Julia called after me. "Brandon picked up a whole case of that IPA you like." Of course he did. I grabbed a bottle and twisted off the cap, taking a long pull while I tried to make sense of what was happening. Through the kitchen window, I could see more people in the backyard, including Julia's mother holding court near the grill. She'd never liked me, always thought Julia had married beneath her station. A cybersecurity consultant wasn't glamorous enough for her precious daughter. "Hey, man." Brandon appeared in the doorway, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "I didn't know you were coming back today." "Yeah, well, surprise," I said. "Seems like there are a lot of those going around." He winced. "Look, Dave, I can explain." "Can you?" I set down my beer and really looked at him. My little brother, who'd crashed on my couch more times than I could count, who'd borrowed money for car repairs and job interviews and first dates, who'd had a key to my house and unlimited access to my wife while I was halfway around the world. Because I'm really curious to hear this explanation. It's not what you think. I think my wife is pregnant, and the timing doesn't add up. I think you've been living in my house for 3 weeks, and I think everyone out there is making jokes about stamina and exercise that are making me want to punch something." Brandon ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. "It just happened, okay? We didn't plan it. Julia was lonely, and you were gone all the time, and you thought you'd comfort her." My voice was perfectly calm, which surprised me. Inside, I felt like I was falling off a cliff, but outside, I sounded almost conversational. "How thoughtful of you. Dave, please, let me explain properly. Not here, not with all these people. No, I think here is perfect." I picked up my beer again and headed back toward the living room. "Let's go celebrate the miracle." The party continued around us, people laughing and talking, and completely oblivious to the fact that my entire life had just imploded. I stood near the fireplace, drinking my beer and watching Julia hold court, one hand perpetually resting on her stomach while she accepted congratulations and advice from her friends. "You must be so excited," Mrs. Patterson from down the street was saying. "Your first baby, and Brandon's been such a help, I'm sure." "I see him here all the time." "Oh, yes," Julia said, glancing over at my brother with a smile that made my chest tight. "He's been incredible. So supportive and caring. I don't know what I would have done without him." I finished my beer and went to get another one. In the kitchen, I found a stack of congratulations cards on the counter, already opened. Most were generic, "Congratulations on your bundle of joy" type cards, but one caught my attention. It was expensive looking, with embossed flowers on the front. I opened it and read the message written in Brandon's familiar handwriting. "To Julia, thank you for the most amazing weeks of my life. All my love, B." I stared at the card for a long time, reading it over and over until the words burned themselves into my brain. Then I carefully put it back on the stack and walked outside. The backyard was full of people I barely recognized, neighbors and coworkers and friends of friends who'd come to celebrate the happy news. Someone had set up a gift table near the patio, already piled high with wrapped boxes and bags. A baby shower, and an announcement party all rolled into one. "David!" Julia's mother spotted me and waved me over. "Congratulations. Julia tells me you're thrilled about becoming a father." "Thrilled," I repeated. "That's definitely one word for it." She leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Between you and me, I always thought Brandon would make a wonderful father. He has such a natural way with children. And he's been so devoted to Julia these past few weeks." I nodded and smiled and made appropriate noises while inside my head, I was screaming. Everyone could see it. The truth was written all over this party, in the way Brandon kept hovering near Julia, in the knowing looks between her friends, in the way my own mother-in-law was practically spelling it out for me. I was the last to know, the husband who'd been working his A off in Prague, debugging systems and fixing networks, while his wife and brother were playing house back home. I was the punchline to a joke everyone else was already in on. "I need to make a phone call," I said, pulling out my phone. "Work stuff." I walked to the far corner of the yard and dialed the fertility clinic where Julia had been going for her prenatal appointments. I'd seen the paperwork on her dresser, Dr. Martinez's office on 5th Street. "Hi, this is David Harlan," I said when someone answered. "My wife Julia is a patient of Dr. Martinez. I need to speak with someone about a potential health concern." It took some convincing, but I finally got transferred to a nurse who was willing to listen. I explained that my brother Brandon had recently been diagnosed with a blood infection that could be passed through close personal contact, and that he'd been in close contact with my pregnant wife. I gave them his full name and suggested they might want to contact both of them for testing, just to be safe. It wasn't entirely a lie. Brandon had gotten some kind of infection last month from a dirty tattoo needle and had been on antibiotics. But the method of transmission was creative license. I hung up and walked back toward the house, where the party was still going strong. Julia was opening gifts now, holding up tiny onesies and blankets while everyone cooed and took pictures. Brandon stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder, looking for all the world like a proud father-to-be. They wanted a celebration? I'd give them one. They'd never forget. 20 minutes later, I was standing by the punch bowl watching Julia unwrap what appeared to be the world's most complicated baby monitor when someone rang the doorbell. The sound cut through the party chatter like a fire alarm. "I'll get it," Julia called, but I was already moving toward the front door. No, I've got it, honey. You keep opening presents. I opened the door to find two women in official-looking polo shirts holding clipboards. One was older, maybe 50, with graying hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. The younger one looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Mr. Harlan, I'm Sandra Chen from the County Health Department. We received a call about potential exposure to a communicable infection at this address. Oh, I said, making my voice sound concerned and confused. What kind of infection? We need to speak with Julia Harlan and Brandon Harlan immediately. It's regarding a potential bloodborne infection that may have been passed through close contact, which could pose risks during pregnancy. The party noise behind me started to die down as people noticed the official visitors. I could feel curious eyes turning toward the front door. Of course, I said, stepping back to let them in. Julia, Brandon, could you come here for a minute? The look on Julia's face when she saw the health department officials was priceless. All the color drained from her cheeks, and she instinctively moved closer to Brandon, who looked like he was about to throw up. Mrs. Harlan? Sandra Chen consulted her clipboard. We need to discuss a potential health exposure with you and Mr. Brandon Harlan. Is there somewhere private we can talk? What's this about? Julia's voice was barely above a whisper. We received information that Mr. Brandon Harlan was recently treated for a blood infection that may be passed between people through close personal contact. Given your pregnancy, we need to conduct immediate testing and contact tracing. The words close personal contact hung in the air like a bomb. I could see Angela and Marcy exchange shocked looks, and Steve from radiology actually dropped his beer bottle. The entire party had gone dead silent, everyone straining to hear what was happening. I don't understand, Julia stammered. Brandon, what is she talking about? Brandon looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. It's not... the doctor said it wasn't serious, just an infection from the tattoo place. Sir, any bloodborne infection can potentially be transmitted through intimate contact, the younger health official said, pulling out some forms. We need to test both of you immediately, and we'll need a list of anyone else you may have been closely involved with over the past 3 months. The implication might as well have been shouted through a megaphone. I heard someone in the living room gasp, and Julia's mother made a sound like she was choking on her drink. This is a mistake, Julia said, her voice getting higher and more panicked. Brandon and we're not... Ma'am, our records show that Mr. Brandon Harlan listed you as a close contact when he was treated for his infection. He indicated that you'd been intimate during the potential exposure period. I had to give Brandon credit. He'd apparently been honest with his doctor about the affair. Too bad he hadn't been honest with me. Is there somewhere we can conduct this interview privately? Sandra Chen asked, looking around at the crowd of shocked party guests. Actually, I said, I think everyone here deserves to know if they've been exposed to anything dangerous. We're all family and close friends. Julia shot me a look that could have melted steel, but I just smiled back innocently. That's not how this works, sir, Sandra said. This is a confidential medical matter. Of course, I said, but surely you can tell us the basics for everyone's safety. The health officials exchanged glances. Then Sandra consulted her clipboard again. Based on the information we received, Mr. Brandon Harlan and Mrs. Julia Harlan were involved in close, unprotected, intimate contact during the period when Mr. Harlan was potentially infectious. Mrs. Harlan's pregnancy makes this a priority case. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Julia's mother dropped her wine glass, and it shattered on the hardwood floor with a crash that seemed to break the spell. Julia Marie Patterson Harlan, her mother said in a voice that could freeze lava. What in God's name have you done? Mom, it's not with his brother? Angela whispered to Marcy. But in the dead silence, everyone heard it. She's been sleeping with his brother? While Dave was working overseas? Steve added, shaking his head. Jesus, Julia. Everyone needs to calm down, Brandon said, finally finding his voice. This is all a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? I laughed, and even I was surprised by how bitter it sounded. Which part is the misunderstanding, Brandon? The part where you've been screwing my wife, or the part where you got her pregnant? Dave, please. No, I think this is perfect timing, actually. I turned to address the room full of shocked guests. Everyone came here to celebrate our miracle baby. Turns out the miracle is that my wife managed to get pregnant by my brother while I was in Prague working to pay for this house. David, stop it, Julia said, tears starting to run down her face. You're embarrassing everyone. I'm embarrassing everyone? I stared at her in disbelief. I'm not the one who threw a baby shower to celebrate my affair baby. I'm not the one who's been playing house with my husband's brother for 3 weeks. Sir, Sandra Chen interrupted, we really need to conduct these interviews privately and get the testing done. The pregnancy makes this time sensitive. Of course, I said. Brandon, Julia, why don't you go with these nice ladies and get your blood drawn? I'll stay here and explain to everyone why the party's over. Julia looked around the room at all the shocked faces, her friends, her mother, the neighbors who'd come to congratulate her. Angela was already whispering furiously into her phone, probably texting everyone she knew. Marcy was staring at Julia like she'd never seen her before. Steve was shaking his head and muttering under his breath. This isn't how I wanted you to find out, Julia said quietly. How did you want me to find out? I asked. At the birth? When the baby came out looking exactly like Brandon? Dave, man, I'm sorry, Brandon said. I never meant for this to happen. You never meant to get caught, I corrected. There's a difference. The health officials were getting impatient, and I could see neighbors starting to gather on the front lawn, drawn by the commotion. Someone had probably called the police by now, thinking there was some kind of domestic disturbance. We need to go, Sandra Chen said firmly. Mrs. Harlan, Mr. Harlan, you'll need to come with us for testing and interviews. Julia grabbed her purse with shaking hands, and Brandon followed her toward the door. As they passed me, Julia stopped and put her hand on my arm. Dave, I know you're angry, but we need to talk about this, about what happens next. I looked down at her hand, then back up at her face. 3 weeks ago, I'd kissed this woman goodbye at the airport and told her I loved her. I'd worked 16-hour days in Prague, staying up until midnight to call her because of the time difference. I'd bought her a necklace from a little shop in Old Town and carried it in my laptop bag for 3 weeks, planning to surprise her. What happens next, I said, is you leave my house, both of you. This is my house, too. No, I said quietly when it's not. Not anymore. After they left with the health officials, the party guests started filtering out in uncomfortable silence. Angela and Marcy whispered together by the door, casting me sympathetic looks. Steve patted my shoulder awkwardly and mumbled something about calling me later. Julia's mother left without saying a word, her face set in stone. Within an hour, my house was empty except for the decorations and the pile of baby gifts. I walked through the rooms, taking down balloons and throwing away paper plates covered with half-eaten cake. The banner on the front porch fluttered in the wind. Welcome home, our little miracle. I tore it down and stuffed it in the garbage can. Then I went down to my basement office, fired up my computer, and started planning my revenge. Because if Julia and Brandon thought a visit from the health department was embarrassing, they had no idea what was coming next. I'd spent 3 weeks in Prague learning about the latest cybersecurity threats. Time to put that education to good use. The first thing I did was change all the passwords. Wi-Fi, Netflix, Spotify, Amazon Prime, everything. Then I went through our shared social media accounts and downloaded every photo, every message, every piece of digital evidence of our life together. You'd be amazed what people post without thinking about it. Like the photo Julia had posted 2 weeks ago of her and Brandon working on the garden. Except in the background, you could see into our bedroom window, and the bed was clearly unmade at 3 p.m. Or the selfie Brandon had taken in our kitchen, wearing nothing but a towel, with the caption, "Morning workout complete." Posted at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, when Julia should have been at work. I'd been blind, but the internet never forgets. My phone buzzed with a text from Brandon. Dave, we need to talk. This is crazy. I typed back. You're right, it is crazy. Crazy that you thought you'd get away with it. I'm coming over. No, you're not. I changed the locks. Which wasn't true yet, but it would be by morning. I'd already found a 24-hour locksmith online. Julia tried calling, but I sent it straight to voicemail. Then she tried texting, David, please be reasonable. We're both adults here. Adults, right. Adults don't screw their husband's brother while he's working overseas. Adults don't throw baby showers for their affair babies and invite the whole neighborhood. I opened my laptop and got to work. Brandon had always been careless with his social media privacy settings. It took me about 10 minutes to access his Facebook account using information I knew about him. His first pet's name, our mother's maiden name, the street we grew up on. People never learn. His messages were a goldmine. Weeks of flirting with Julia, planning their dates while I was gone, even discussing what they'd tell me when I got back. My personal favorite was from 5 days ago. Don't worry, babe, Dave's too clueless to figure it out. He's always buried in his computer anyway. Clueless. That stung more than it should have, but the real treasure was in Julia's email, which I still had access to because She'd never changed the password on the account I'd set up for her years ago. Appointment confirmations with Dr. Martinez, including detailed notes about the baby's development and due date. Conversations with her friends about the situation and how to handle David. Shopping lists for the party with notes like, make sure Brandon brings the good beer, David's favorite kind, it'll make him less suspicious. They'd planned this, the whole thing. The party, the timing, even the specific details designed to keep me from asking too many questions. I screenshot everything and saved it to a secure folder. Then I started phase 2. Brandon worked for a small construction company owned by his buddy Mike Torino. Mike was old-school Italian family values, the kind of guy who'd fire someone for cheating on their wife, let alone their brother's wife. He was also active on Facebook, where he regularly posted about the importance of loyalty and brotherhood in business. I created an anonymous email account and sent Mike a message with some of Brandon's more incriminating texts and photos. Nothing illegal, just evidence of what kind of man he employed. The subject line read, "Thought you should know what Brandon Harlan does in his spare time." Then I turned my attention to Julia's workplace. The hospital had strict policies about staff conduct, especially regarding anything that might create scandal or reflect poorly on their reputation. Julia was proud of her job, had worked there for 8 years, had friends and a reputation she cared about. I found the hospital's internal messaging system, the same one Julia had complained about for months because it was poorly secured and always getting hacked. She was right. It took me less than an hour to get inside. I didn't post anything malicious or false. I just shared some of Julia's own words from her email conversations with her friends, her complaints about me, her descriptions of her relationship with Brandon, her casual dismissal of our marriage as basically over anyway. Let her coworkers see what she really thought about commitment and marriage vows. By midnight, I was exhausted but satisfied. Phase 1 of my revenge was complete. Now I just had to wait for the fallout. I didn't have to wait long. My phone started ringing at 6 a.m., Brandon probably calling from the construction site. "Dave, what the heck did you do?" "Mike just fired me." "Good morning to you too, brother. This isn't funny. I need this job. I've got rent to pay. Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to redecorate my bedroom. Look, I know you're pissed, but destroying my life isn't going to fix anything." "I'm not destroying your life," I said, pouring myself coffee and enjoying the sound of panic in his voice. "I'm just making sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are. There's a difference." Mike said someone sent him private messages. "That's illegal, Dave. Hacking into people's accounts." "Is it? I wouldn't know. I'm just a clueless computer nerd, remember?" Silence on the other end of the line. "How long have you been planning this?" he asked finally. "Planning what?" "I just got home yesterday. Though apparently you and Julia have been planning things for weeks." "Dave, please, I'll leave town, okay? I'll disappear. Just don't destroy everything." "Too late for that. You should have disappeared 3 weeks ago." I hung up and checked my email. 3 messages from Julia's friends, all variations of, "Is it true about Julia and Brandon?" and "We had no idea, we're so sorry." One from Steve at the hospital. "Dude, Julia's in deep crap. Administration called an emergency meeting." Perfect. Julia called at 7:30, crying, "David, they suspended me. They suspended me pending an investigation into my conduct." "What kind of conduct?" "You know what kind. They said someone leaked private communications that reflected poorly on my professionalism and moral character." "Huh, that's terrible. Maybe you shouldn't have put your lack of professionalism and moral character in writing." "This is my career, David. 8 years I've worked there. 8 years. Yeah, well, I worked on our marriage for 10 years. Guess we both lost something important." "I can't believe you're doing this. I can't believe you're being so vindictive." Vindictive. Like I was the one who'd done something wrong. "Julia, you threw a baby shower for your affair baby. You invited my neighbors, your mother, your friends from work. You made me stand there and smile and accept congratulations for your betrayal. And you want to talk to me about vindictive? It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "How was it supposed to happen? Were you planning to tell me the truth eventually, or just hope I'd never noticed that my kid looked exactly like my brother?" More crying. I was getting tired of the tears. Where were the tears when she was planning her affair? Where were the tears when she was lying to my face for weeks? "I need to come get my things," she said finally. "No. David, be reasonable. I need clothes, my medication. Make a list. I'll pack a bag and leave it on the porch." "This is still my house." "Actually, it's not. Check the deed." I bought this house before we got married, and I never added your name to it. Legally, you're just a guest who's overstayed her welcome. I'd checked with a lawyer friend at 5 a.m. Turns out working in cybersecurity teaches you to be paranoid about legal protections. You can't just throw me out. I'm pregnant. You're pregnant with another man's baby. Find another man's house to live in. I hung up and went back to my computer. Phase 2 was about to begin, and it was going to be much more creative than Phase 1. Brandon wanted to play games? I'd show him games. Brandon drove a 1995 Ford pickup truck that he'd restored himself and babied like it was a classic Mustang. It wasn't worth much money, but it was his pride and joy. He'd spent weekends working on the engine, had custom pinstriping done, even installed a premium sound system that probably cost more than the truck was worth. I knew where he parked it, in the lot behind Murphy's bar, where he'd been staying since I kicked him out of my house. Murphy's was the kind of place where construction workers went after their shifts, where everyone knew everyone else's business, and where reputation mattered. It was also the kind of place where people appreciated a good prank. I waited until 2 a.m., then drove over with a bag full of supplies I'd bought at 3 different stores. Zip ties, industrial-strength stink bombs, and a container of live crickets from the pet store. The crickets had been the hardest part. Apparently, most pet stores don't sell them in bulk at midnight. Getting into Brandon's truck was embarrassingly easy. He'd never learned to lock his doors, too trusting for his own good. I zip-tied the stink bombs under his seat where he wouldn't notice them right away, then released the crickets into the cab. About 200 of them, chirping and hopping around in the darkness. Then I set up my phone to record and settled in to wait. Brandon stumbled out of Murphy's at 6:30 a.m., looking hungover and miserable. He'd probably been drowning his sorrows after getting fired, telling everyone who'd listen about his crazy brother who'd ruined his life over a misunderstanding. He climbed into the truck and started the engine. For about 10 seconds, nothing happened. Then the heat from the engine started activating the stink bombs, and Brandon's face went from confused to horrified. The smell hit him first, a combination of rotten eggs and dead fish that would make a garbage truck driver gag. Then he noticed the crickets, hundreds of them jumping around the cab, in his hair, down his shirt, chirping like a nature documentary. He bailed out of the truck so fast, he left the engine running, stumbling backward and swatting at crickets while gagging from the smell. A crowd was already gathering. Murphy's had a breakfast crowd of early shift workers who were getting the show of their lives. "Jesus Christ, Brandon," someone yelled. "What the heck did you do to your truck?" Brandon was hopping around the parking lot, shaking crickets out of his clothes and dry heaving from the stink. "It wasn't me. Someone sabotaged my truck." "Who would do that?" asked Tommy Kowalski, one of the guys from Brandon's old construction crew. Brandon looked directly at my hiding spot behind the dumpster like he knew I was there. "My brother." "Your brother did this? Why?" And that's when Brandon had to explain, in front of a dozen guys he'd worked with and drank with for years, exactly why his brother might want to humiliate him. He had to admit that he'd been sleeping with his brother's wife, that she was pregnant, that he'd been fired from his job because of it. The crowd's sympathy evaporated instantly. "You knocked up Dave's wife?" Tommy shook his head in disgust. "Man, that's low even for you. It's complicated." "No, it's not complicated," said another guy. "You screwed your brother's wife. That's not complicated, that's just crappy." I stayed hidden and kept recording while Brandon tried to explain himself to an increasingly hostile crowd. These were working-class guys who understood loyalty and brotherhood, who'd probably punch someone for disrespecting their family. Brandon had violated every code they lived by. By the time he managed to get most of the crickets out of his truck, everyone at Murphy's knew the whole story. By noon, it would be all over town. I posted the video to YouTube with the title, "Cheater Gets What He Deserves," and sent the link to everyone in Brandon's contact list. Within hours, it had 50 views, then 100, then 500. Brandon called me that afternoon, furious. "You're insane! You could have ended me with those stink bombs." "They're non-toxic," I said. "I checked. Though I can't say the same for your reputation. Everyone's laughing at me. Everywhere I go, people are laughing." "Good. Maybe now you know how I felt at that party yesterday." "Dave, this has to stop. We need to work this out like adults." "I tried being an adult. I tried trusting you. I tried believing that my wife and my brother wouldn't betray me the second I left town. How did that work out for me? What do you want? You want me to grovel? Fine, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I slept with Julia. I'm sorry about the baby. I'm sorry about everything. I don't want your apology, I said. I want you to understand what it feels like to have your life turned upside down by people you trusted. My life is already upside down. I lost my job. I can't show my face anywhere in town. And now I'm internet famous for all the wrong reasons. Then you're starting to get it, but I wasn't done. Not even close. That evening, I drove to the apartment complex where Brandon was staying. It was a rundown place on the wrong side of town. The kind of building where the walls were thin and everyone could hear their neighbor's business. I'd spent the afternoon preparing my next surprise, a Bluetooth speaker system that I could control remotely, programmed with a loop of crying baby sounds mixed with my own voice reading some of Brandon's more romantic text messages to Julia. Things like, "I can't wait to hold you again," and "Dave will never love you the way I do," delivered in my most sarcastic tone. I hid the speakers in the stairwell outside his apartment and activated them at 3 a.m. The crying baby sounds echoed through the building, punctuated by my voice reading Brandon's love letters. Within minutes, lights were coming on in apartments throughout the complex. By 3:30, there was pounding on Brandon's door. "Turn that crap off," someone yelled. "It's not me." Brandon's voice muffled through the door. "I don't know where it's coming from." But everyone knew it was connected to him somehow. The voice reading the text messages was clearly talking about him and Julia. The baby crying was obviously a reference to their situation. The building manager showed up at 4 a.m. and threatened to evict him if the noise didn't stop. Brandon spent the rest of the night searching the stairwells and hallways, trying to find speakers that were hidden too well for him to locate. I watched from my car across the street, recording everything on my phone. The next morning, Julia called me crying again. "David, you have to stop this. Brandon's losing his mind. He hasn't slept in 2 days. Maybe he should have thought about that before he decided to redecorate our bedroom. This isn't just hurting him, it's hurting me too. People are staring at me everywhere I go. Good, actions have consequences. I'm pregnant, David. This stress isn't good for the baby. It's not my baby, but it's your brother's baby, your nephew or niece." That stopped me for a second. I hadn't thought about it that way. This baby would be my blood relative, an innocent kid who didn't ask to be born into this mess. But then I remembered the party, the banner, the congratulations cards. The way Julia had stood there, accepting praise for her miracle while I smiled like an idiot. "Then you better hope Brandon figures out how to be a better father than he was a brother," I said. "David, please, I know you're angry, but this has gone too far." "Too far? I haven't even gotten started." Because I hadn't. The stink bombs and crickets were just warm-up acts. The real show was yet to come. By the end of the week, Brandon looked like he'd been through a war. Every time he tried to sleep, the hidden speakers would start up with crying baby sounds and my sarcastic commentary. Every time he went out in public, someone would recognize him from the cricket video and start laughing. He'd been fired from his job, kicked out of Murphy's Bar for causing a disturbance, and was probably close to a nervous breakdown. Julia wasn't doing much better. The hospital had extended her suspension pending a full investigation into her conduct. Her friends were avoiding her mother wasn't speaking to her, and everywhere she went, people whispered and pointed. But I was just getting warmed up. I'd spent years building network security systems, which meant I knew exactly how to tear them down. Brandon and Julia had made their lives public through social media, email, and digital communication. Now I was going to make sure everyone saw exactly who they really were. I started with Brandon's dating profiles. Yes, profiles, plural. Turned out my faithful, committed brother had active accounts on 3 different dating apps, all of them updated within the past month. While he was supposedly in love with Julia, he was still shopping around for other options. I screenshot everything and created a simple website, The Real Brandon Harlan. Nothing fancy, just a collection of his dating profiles, his text messages with Julia, and some choice quotes from his conversations with other women. The cricket video got featured prominently, along with a timeline of his relationship with my wife. Then I bought some Google ads to make sure the site showed up whenever someone searched for his name. Julia got the same treatment. The Real Julia Harlan featured her emails complaining about our marriage, her text messages with Brandon, and some particularly unflattering photos from her social media accounts. Nothing nude or illegal, just evidence of who she really was when she thought no one was looking. I sent the links to everyone we knew. Friends, family, coworkers, neighbors. I posted them on local Facebook groups and community bulletin boards. I even printed out flyers and left them on car windshields at the hospital where Julia worked. By Monday morning, both websites had hundreds of views. By Tuesday, they'd been shared dozens of times. By Wednesday, Julia and Brandon were internet famous in our small town, and not in a good way. That's when they decided to fight back. I was in my basement office, monitoring the web traffic and enjoying the comments people were leaving on the sites, when someone started pounding on my front door. Not knocking, pounding like they were trying to break it down. I checked the security camera I'd installed and saw Brandon standing on my porch, red-faced and furious. Julia was behind him, looking scared but determined. "Open the door, Dave," Brandon yelled. "We need to talk." I considered ignoring them, but I was curious to see what they had to say. I opened the door but kept the security chain attached. "What do you want?" "You know what we want," Julia said. "We want you to take down those websites and stop this insanity." "Or what?" "Or we'll call the police," Brandon said. "What you're doing is harassment. It's probably illegal." I laughed. "What I'm doing is sharing publicly available information. Everything on those sites came from your own social media accounts, your own emails, your own text messages. If you don't like how it makes you look, maybe you shouldn't have written it in the first place." "You hacked our accounts." "I used information you freely shared with me over the years to access accounts you'd forgotten to secure." "That's not hacking. That's just poor password management." "David, please," Julia said. And for the first time since this whole thing started, she sounded genuinely desperate. "I lost my job. The hospital fired me this morning." "Congratulations. Now you know how it feels to have your life destroyed by someone you trusted." "This is different. What you're doing is vindictive and cruel. What I'm doing is making sure everyone knows the truth. You two wanted to play house while I was gone? Fine, but you don't get to do it in secret and then act like victims when you get caught." Brandon stepped closer to the door, and I could smell alcohol on his breath. "Take down the websites, Dave. I'm not asking." "Or what? You'll beat me up? That'll look great on your permanent record. I'm sure it'll help with your job search." "I don't have anything left to lose." "Sure you do. You could lose your teeth. You could lose your freedom if you assault me on my own property. You could lose what little dignity you have left." Julia put her hand on Brandon's arm, trying to calm him down. "Brandon, don't. This is what he wants." She was right. I did want Brandon to take a swing at me. I had cameras recording everything, and an assault charge would be the perfect capstone to his public humiliation. But Brandon wasn't quite drunk enough to be that stupid. He stepped back, breathing hard. "This isn't over," he said. "You're right," I agreed. "It's not." They left, and I went back to my computer. But instead of working on the websites, I found myself thinking about what Julia had said. She'd lost her job, her career, her income, her professional reputation, all gone. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her, almost. Then I remembered the party, the banner, the congratulations cards. The way she'd stood there, accepting praise for her betrayal while I smiled like an idiot. No, she'd made her choices. Now she got to live with the consequences. But Brandon wasn't done trying to fight back. That night he showed up at my house again, this time with a lawyer. "Mr. Harlan," the lawyer said when I answered the door, "I'm Robert Chen, representing Brandon Harlan and Julia Harlan. We're prepared to file harassment charges and a civil suit if you don't cease your campaign of intimidation immediately." Campaign of intimidation? The websites, the public humiliation, the harassment at Mr. Brandon Harlan's residence. It needs to stop. I looked past the lawyer at Brandon, who was trying to look tough, but mostly just looked tired. "Did Brandon tell you why I'm doing this?" He explained that there was a marital dispute. "A marital dispute," I laughed. "Is that what we're calling it? My wife is pregnant with my brother's baby, and that's a marital dispute?" The lawyer looked uncomfortable. "Regardless of the underlying circumstances, your response has been disproportionate and potentially illegal. Everything I've done has been perfectly legal. I've shared publicly available information, I've expressed my opinions, and I've exercised my right to free speech. If you think you can prove otherwise, go ahead and file your lawsuit. Mr. Harlan, my clients are prepared to offer a settlement. They'll agree to leave town permanently if you agree to take down the websites and cease all harassment." I pretended to consider it. Leave town permanently? Yes, they understand that their presence here is problematic. They're willing to relocate and start over somewhere else. And in return, I just pretend none of this ever happened. I just let them ride off into the sunset and live happily ever after? You get your life back, Mr. Harlan. You can move on. Find someone new. Start over. Start over. Like the past 10 years of my life had just been a rough draft. No deal, I said. Mr. Harlan, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. They destroyed my marriage, my trust, and my family. They humiliated me in front of everyone I know. And now they want to just leave town and pretend it never happened? No, they don't get to escape the consequences of their actions. I closed the door and went back to my computer. If Brandon and Julia thought a lawyer was going to scare me, they had another thing coming. It was time for the grand finale. I spent the next week planning the perfect ending to this whole mess. Brandon and Julia wanted to play victim? They wanted to act like I was the bad guy for exposing their lies? Fine. I'd give them something to really complain about. The plan was simple but effective. I sent out invitations to everyone. And I mean everyone. Julia's friends from the hospital, Brandon's construction buddies, our neighbors, our families, even some of the people who'd been commenting on the websites. The invitation was elegant, printed on expensive cardstock. David Harlan cordially invites you to a celebration of truth and consequences. Come learn what really happened while you were celebrating a miracle. Saturday, 7 p.m., 1247 Oak Street. Refreshments will be provided. I rented a projector and a sound system. I prepared a presentation that would make PowerPoint jealous. And I stocked up on beer, wine, and snacks because nothing says revenge party like good catering. Saturday evening, they started arriving. Angela and Marcy showed up first, probably hoping for more gossip to spread around town. Steve from the hospital came with 2 other people I didn't recognize. The neighbors came out of curiosity. Even some of Brandon's old construction buddies showed up, probably expecting free beer and entertainment. By 7:30, my living room was packed with about 30 people, all of them buzzing with anticipation. I'd moved all the furniture to create a makeshift theater, with the projector aimed at the wall, where Julia's baby shower banner had hung just 2 weeks earlier. Thank you all for coming, I said, standing in front of the crowd with a wireless microphone I'd borrowed from a friend who did wedding DJs. 2 weeks ago, many of you were here for a celebration. Tonight, I want to show you what you were really celebrating. I clicked the remote, and the first slide appeared on the wall, a timeline of Julia and Brandon's relationship, complete with text messages, emails, and photos. The crowd went quiet as they realized what they were seeing. This is from 3 months ago, I said, pointing to a particularly damning text exchange. While I was working in Denver, Julia and Brandon were discussing how to handle the situation if I came home early. Gasps from the audience. Angela actually put her hand over her mouth. And this, I clicked to the next slide, is from 6 weeks ago. Brandon telling Julia that I'm too stupid to figure it out and that I deserve what I get for being gone so much. The crowd was riveted. This was better than reality TV, and it was happening right in their neighborhood. But my personal favorite, I said, clicking to a photo of Brandon and Julia in our bedroom, is this selfie they took in my bed while I was in Prague. Notice the timestamp, 2 p.m. on a Tuesday when Julia was supposed to be at work. Someone in the back whistled low. Steve was shaking his head in disgust. Now, you might be wondering why I'm showing you all this. After all, this is my personal business, right? My private humiliation. I clicked to the next slide, a photo from the baby shower, showing Julia accepting congratulations while I stood in the background looking confused. But they made it public. They invited you all here to celebrate their betrayal. They made you unwitting participants in their lie. So I thought you deserved to know the truth. That's when the front door opened and Julia walked in, followed by Brandon and the lawyer from earlier in the week. David, stop this immediately, the lawyer said, but his voice was lost in the murmur of the crowd. Julia looked around at all the faces staring at her, at the evidence of her affair projected on the wall, and started crying. David, please, haven't you humiliated us enough? Humiliated you. I laughed into the microphone, and the sound echoed through the room. You humiliated yourselves. I'm just making sure everyone knows about it. Brandon pushed through the crowd toward me, his face red with anger. Turn that crap off, Dave. This is insane. What's insane, I said, backing away from him, is that you thought you'd get away with it. What's insane is that you threw a party to celebrate your affair baby and expected me to smile and play along. It's not an affair baby, Julia screamed, and the room went dead silent. The baby isn't Brandon's. I stopped moving. The crowd stopped murmuring. Even Brandon turned to stare at her. What? He said. Julia wiped her eyes and looked around the room at all the shocked faces. The baby isn't Brandon's. It's David's. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. That's impossible. The timing was off because I lied about how far along I am. I'm not 12 weeks pregnant, I'm 8 weeks. The baby is yours, David. The room erupted in confused chatter. I stood there with the microphone in my hand, trying to process what she'd just said. Then why? I started. Because I was having an affair with Brandon, and I thought the baby might be his, and I panicked. I told everyone I was further along than I really was, because I was scared and confused and I didn't know what to do. Brandon was staring at her like she'd grown a second head. You told me the baby was mine. I thought it might be. I hoped it might be. I don't know, okay? I was sleeping with both of you and I got pregnant, and I didn't know whose it was. So you lied to everyone, I said quietly. I lied to everyone, she agreed. I lied about the timing, I lied about the father, I lied about everything because I was scared and stupid and I thought I could figure it out later. The crowd was dead silent now, everyone straining to hear this unexpected twist in the drama. But you were still having an affair, I said. Yes, I was having an affair. I was lonely and angry and you were gone all the time and Brandon was there and it just happened. It just happened, I repeated. For weeks, she admitted. I looked at Brandon, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. And you? You thought you were going to be a father? I thought the baby was mine. That's why I was so involved, why I was helping with the party. I thought we were going to be a family. A family, I said. The three of us? I thought you'd divorce her and I'd raise the kid. The honesty was almost refreshing after weeks of lies. I looked around the room at all the faces staring at us, neighbors, friends, coworkers, family, everyone waiting to see what would happen next. So let me make sure I understand this, I said into the microphone. Julia, you were having an affair with my brother. You got pregnant and didn't know who the father was, so you lied about the timing to cover your tracks. You threw a baby shower to celebrate what you thought might be your affair baby. And Brandon, you were planning to steal my wife and raise what you thought was your kid. That's basically accurate, Julia said quietly. And now you're telling me the baby is actually mine, and I've spent 2 weeks destroying your lives for nothing? Not for nothing, Brandon said. We still betrayed you. We still lied to you. We still hurt you. I stood there for a long moment, looking at my wife and my brother, thinking about everything that had happened. The party, the humiliation, the revenge, the websites, the public shaming. Then I started laughing. It started as a chuckle, then built to a full-blown laugh that echoed through the microphone and filled the room. I laughed until tears ran down my face, until my sides hurt, until everyone was staring at me like I'd lost my mind. You know what? I said finally. You're right. You did betray me. You did lie to me. You did humiliate me in front of everyone I know. The fact that the baby might be mine doesn't change any of that. I clicked the remote one more time and the final slide appeared on the wall. A photo of divorce papers. So here's what's going to happen. Julia, you're going to sign these divorce papers. Brandon, you're going to stay the heck away from both of us. And everyone else gets to go home with a great story about the most dysfunctional family in town. I set the microphone down and walked toward the front door. As I passed Brandon, I stopped and looked him in the eye. By the way, I said, I never changed the locks. You could have come back any time. I just wanted to see how long it would take you to figure that out. Then I walked outside, got in my car, and drove away, leaving behind the house, the party, the drama, and the two people who had taught me that sometimes the best revenge is just walking away. 6 months later, I was living in a new city with a new job and a new perspective on life. Julia had moved back in with her mother and was working at a different hospital. Brandon had left town entirely, probably to find some other family to destroy. And me? I learned that sometimes the best way to win is to stop playing the game entirely.